Hello and welcome back to Bookish and welcome back to Tag Tuesday. This is the second Tag Tuesday tag I filmed today. I filmed one earlier, the Dark Academia book tag, and I was going to put this up on Tuesday, and then I saw that Steve Donoghue had made a tag, and the only person he tagged in it was me, and that's the President's book tag. And so I thought I have to do that for Tuesday, because after Tuesday I may not be rational enough anymore to actually make a tag that makes sense and answer all the prompts. So thanks Steve for creating the tag and for tagging me. And there are 10 prompts. Each one has to do with something or some characteristic of presidents of the United States in honor of Election Day today. So, question number 1, George Washington, what's the first book you remember reading all by yourself with no help from anybody? This is tough for me. I'm not 28 like Steve, so at the age of 53, it's a little bit harder for me to remember what the first book I read, which I guess I wouldn't call a chapter or a picture book, but a chapter book. So I'm going to go with a book I've mentioned here before. It's called Call It Courage. It's about a Polynesian kid who gets stranded on an island all by himself and how he survives. I think it comes in around 100 pages, maybe. And it's just a really good adventure story, and I remember reading that book over and over again when I was a kid. So for the George Washington one, I will go with Call It Courage. Prompt number 2. By the way, Steve and I differ a great deal in our opinion of George Washington and how important he was. Anyway, prompt number 2, John Adams, what book comes to mind that's short but disproportionately powerful? Certainly John Adams was short. Certainly he was incredibly important, even if he did ruin a lot of his legacy by letting his petty personal goals or petty personal revenge plans lead him to push through Congress the Alien and Sedition Acts, which, were really a violation of the spirit of the first. Anyway, moving on. So a short book that is disproportionately powerful. I'm going to go with Tell Me How It Ends by Valeria Luiselli. This is kind of her essay. It's kind of a long-form essay about the refugee crisis at the American border and how we deal with kids who are caught up in that, who get caught up in the immigration system in the United States, and Ms. Luiselli's experience in trying to help those kids by acting as an interpreter for them. It's a really powerful book. It really made me rethink things that I thought about the refugee crisis and our immigration situation, and in a lot of ways it's one of those areas where I think President Obama, ironically, probably did the worst and could have done more. Question number 3, Thomas Jefferson, tell us about a book you like that's written... question number 3 is tell me about a book you like that's written by a bad person. And Steve rightly points out that Thomas Jefferson was not only a slave owner, but he was also a rapist. I think one of the greatest miscarriages that's happened in American history in maybe the last 20 or 30 years is this idea that the relationship between Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings was some kind of a romance. That is not true, and as I've said many times before, Sally Hemings was Thomas Jefferson's slave. She was his property. She did not have the agency to say no. Therefore, since she couldn't say no, he raped her repeatedly and fathered children with her, which he, tried to ignore. By the way, not uncommon at all among slave owners in the United States for that very exact thing to happen. But the book by a very bad person, I'm going to go with The Road by Cormac McCarthy, just to make Steve happy, because he hates The Road and he hates Cormac McCarthy. I don't hate The Road, and there are some books by Cormac McCarthy that I like a lot, but I don't think Cormac McCarthy's a particularly good person. I think he's a pretty bad person who has a tendency to be self-aggrandizing. I think that's an understatement. He has a tendency to try to pretend as though I think his writing and his craft is something that just comes to him almost perfectly formed in a dreamlike state in which, mortals like us couldn't possibly understand the process by which he goes about writing these exquisite novels that he writes. On top of that, he is a user of women. He essentially sponged off his first wife until he had enough success from, I believe, Suttree was the book that gave him enough success to leave her. He's gone through a series of marriages and left behind children, which he may or may not act as a father for. Ever since then, in fact, I believe The Road is supposed to have been inspired by a trip that he took with his young son. I just don't have a lot of respect for Cormac McCarthy. I don't think he's a very good person. I do think occasionally he writes a very good book. Prompt number 5, Franklin Roosevelt, is there a book that fundamentally changed your conception of reading? This was really hard. I would think at various points in my life, lots of books have fundamentally changed my conception of reading. So I think I went with a book that fundamentally changed my conception, or maybe I'm going to go with an author that fundamentally changed my conception of what a book can do, of what a novel can be. And that's going to be the works of W.G. Sebald, particularly Rings of Saturn, Austerlitz, and I also read The Immigrants. I haven't read the fourth of his novels, whose name right now escapes me. And I don't know, it's almost, and I'm sure Steve will scoff at this, but there's almost like a kind of alchemy that happens with Sebald's writing, where you feel like he's, perhaps just writing a book about personal experiences, or about a character going places, or maybe about just going for a walk himself, or a walking tour of a part of England, and all of a sudden all these other things and themes and ideas and connections just fall into place, and in the end you're just like, how did that happen? What, how does he do that? And it really kind of, I think, altered my conception of what it was possible for a novel to do in terms of its impact on the reader. So I would just go with the works of W.G. Sebald there. Prompt number 6, John Kennedy. What's the most glamorous It book you've ever read? I think the most glamorous It book I've ever read was The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. And I don't know if you know that or not, but when that book came out, it was a huge deal. And as a matter of fact, that phrase, tipping point, I think has become much more common in American society and around the world because of Malcolm Gladwell's book. I think Gladwell is interesting. I think he sometimes is a little bit too impressed with himself. But I did read that, and I guess I'm going to call that the most glamorous It book I've ever read. Prompt 7, Gerald Ford. Have you ever read a placeholder book, something that only served to get you from one book to another? This is going to be weird, and like Steve picked some of the books in the Aubrey Maturin series by Patrick O'Brien, which I've talked about 1,000 times. And I'm going to pick a book from series 2, and that's the second book in the Elizabeth Salander series by Stieg Larsson. The title of the book is The Girl Who Played with Fire. I think it's supposed to just get you to the girl who kicked a hornet's nest. I really liked The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, despite what I felt was like quite a lot of Swedish socialist political ideas in there. But I really liked it, and so I read The Girl Who Played with Fire, and I just didn't think the story really went anywhere. There's dramatic tension, there's action, but did it really add anything to my understanding of Elizabeth Salander? No. And so I never read the third book, so I'm going to say it's a placeholder book, even though I never went on and read the third book. Let's see. Prompt number 8. Bill Clinton, a reading experience you loved despite how utterly sinful it was. And this is really going to make Steve happy, because I am going to pick A Movable Feast by Ernest Hemingway. And I know Steve hates Ernest Hemingway. Bear with me just for a minute. A Movable Feast, if you are a person who really likes gossipy stuff about writers, and like me, you were enamored with the expatriate community of Americans in Paris in the 20s and 30s, then this is just like the perfect gossipy book. It's mean-spirited, and Hemingway is definitely lying, and he's definitely trying to run people like Gertrude Stein and F. Scott Fitzgerald. He's trying to run them down and bring himself up, but I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed all the weird little gossipy insights. I enjoyed the meanness, which I recognize as meanness. I enjoyed the atmosphere of him talking about Paris in the 20s. I think it's a pretty sinful book in that he uses it to settle scores against some of his writing rivals, all of whom I believe were dead at the time that he was writing the book. So that's pretty sinful, I think. But I did enjoy, and have enjoyed on more than one occasion, reading A Movable Feast. So prompt number, let's see, what are we on? Prompt number 9, George W. Bush, what's the most harmful book you've ever read? I'm going to go with The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. I just think that book, and this is, I think, kind of similar to Steve's answer. I think that book just kind of promotes selfishness. It promotes the idea that some people are, perhaps more important than others. And it promotes the idea of looking out for yourself. And I think that a lot of people read that book. A lot of politicians read that book sometime in the 70s or 80s or maybe even the 90s, depending on how young they are. And a lot of young, mediocre white boys decided to go into politics because they thought that book was about them. And they thought that philosophy was describing them, and therefore they should follow that book. And I think that's actually been tremendously harmful. And then prompt 10, Barack Obama, what's the last great book you read? Flaws and all, Jane Eyre. October's over. If you asked me the last great book I read, it was Jane Eyre. If I'd read Jane Eyre before Barchester Towers, I would have said Barchester Towers, but it was Jane Eyre. There are flaws in it. There are some issues in which ways in which people with disabilities are presented. I think Mr. Rochester is definitely problematic as a leading man, but I loved it. I thought that book was great. Anyway, there you go. There's the President's Book Tag for Election Day 2020. My fingers and toes are crossed. I'm glad I filmed. I'm glad now I filmed the other video, so I'll have something to post on Thursday in case I'm comatose from an overindulgence in scotch, depending on how things go tomorrow night. But anyway, thanks to Steve for creating the tag and for tagging me. I'm going to tag a few people who I know kind of have some political interest. So if you want to do this tag, please do it, whether I tag you or not. But I'm tagging Heidi from My Reading Life. I'm tagging Doris from All the Books. I'm tagging Lucas from Bits of Lit. I'm tagging Jason from Old Blues Chapter and Verse. I'm tagging Ami from that channel that has a really long name that Steve and I can't remember. And I'm going to tag Sonia from An Enthusiastic Reader. I will leave links to Steve's video down below and all the prompts and links to all the channels I mentioned. Look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.